Good morning, members. How are you? Hope everyone is doing well. I think by now you all know me, Lana Abu Qalbain, and with me is Aska, our colleague, and most importantly, we have one of our members. Paul, I'll give you the floor to introduce yourself, and maybe we'll wait just for a few minutes to have everyone on board so we can have this technical workshop, which will touch upon acoustics and a lot of details around that topic.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Paul Schwartz. I am the owner and the technical director of the Dubai Acoustic Research Laboratory. We have a working partnership with Dubai Civil Defence and the Emirates Safety Laboratory, and obviously work very closely with Dubai Central Laboratory as the only EAC accredited acoustic laboratory in the UAE. There is one other acoustic laboratory that is recognized as a UCAS accredited facility, as I say, we're the only Emirates international accredited facility in the UAE, and in actual fact within the GCC. We do a lot of testing and certification and acoustic design support for the built environment. So that's not only environmental noise, but that's internal building acoustics as well. And really, we see our role within the construction industry helping people to ensure compliance with the regulations within Dubai and Abu Dhabi, who are the two Emirates that lead the UAE in terms of published regulations and to a certain extent enforcement. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in my presentation. And really, the presentation is all about a practical guide, the main points regarding the acoustic regulations, primarily focused on Dubai and Abu Dhabi, but I'll also touch on the various regulations that are in place around the GCC, the differences between them, and the key elements that make up compliance with those. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end for anybody that might have any questions or queries on any of those regulations or enforcement or practical steps that can be used to comply with that. So, Lana, should we give people a little bit more time, or should we?
Maybe
make a start?
Yeah, I mean, just start sharing your screen, and I guess with that we'll be hitting 11:05, in which we can start, inshallah. And by the way, sorry that you all do not have access to mic and camera. Probably I forgot to initiate that on the platform. So I'm giving you all access to your mics and cameras. So Paul, feel free to engage with the members as this presentation goes through. Thank you.
No problem at all. All right. The second that my clock hits 5 minutes past, I'll make a start. Okay, so my clock has just ticked over to 5 minutes past. So, hello everybody. Welcome to the Emirates Green Building Technical Workshops. This one is by myself and my entity, the Dubai Acoustic Research Laboratory, and regarding the practical guide to compliance with the mandatory acoustic regulations. Now, that's probably a key word that we're going to start with, mandatory. Since 2015, there have been mandatory requirements within the Dubai Construction Code, which is obviously the Dubai Building Code now, previously Al Safat, and the Green Building Regulations before that, and Estidama in Abu Dhabi. Now, I think a lot of people may realize that there were some acoustic requirements, but I don't. I get a lot of surprised looks on a regular basis when I tell people that are actually mandatory and they must be complied with, which is why we get a lot of requests for support on construction projects, both in the design stage and the construction monitoring and the handover period, really just to ensure that those requirements are met. And really, at the end of the day, I mean, we're not going to pretend that the acoustic regulations are as critical to life safety as fire and life safety, or, for example, the structural content of a building. At the end of the day, if the acoustic consultant generally gets things wrong on a project, or the acoustics are not taken into account on a project, the worst that we will see is that people have unreasonable exposure to a little bit of extra noise. It might be difficult to hear someone having a conversation or presentation in a boardroom or a meeting room, or there may be a bit of extra noise coming in from outside, or the HVAC system, the air conditioning within a building. So to my knowledge, nobody's ever died or been seriously injured due to excessive noise exposure in a standard environment. However, the importance of acoustics really goes to the heart of the comfort and enjoyment and the expectations of quality of the development of any given project. It's not a lot of point if you are sitting in a cinema room, or you're in a meeting room or a boardroom, and you can't hear the words that are being said. Similarly, if your children are in school and they're sitting any further back than halfway in the classroom and they can hardly hear any words that the teacher is saying, that means that your children are missing out on a significant part of their education. And it's really the primary role as to why they're sitting in that classroom. Similarly, we all have fast-paced, busy lives. I'm sure everybody on this call works exceptionally hard, and our sleep and the quality of our sleep is very, very important to us. And if we do not get a decent quality of sleep, and noise being a primary factor in that, then that can seriously affect our health over the medium and longer term period. Pretty much everybody's obviously able to recover from having a single night of sleep temporarily interrupted, but if that happens day after day, night after night, for weeks, months and years at a time, studies have shown that takes a significant impact on people's health and well-being. So while it's not an immediately obvious contributor towards quality of life, it is one of the primary secondary factors affecting people's quality of life. And the fact that it also is one of those disciplines that largely goes unseen in a development, because it really is about the subjective analysis of, or assessment of, people when they enter a space and how they interact and emotionally react to the space. It's a very personal thing. But the good thing is that the world of acoustics and acoustic engineers, it's very much based in mathematics and statistics, and we can show that the vast majority of people will react in a very similar way to certain aspects of noise and certain levels of noise. And so we can predict and help the architects and the engineers of the built environment to achieve a space that we are more than 95% confident that the majority of people will interact in a positive way with. So in that respect, what I'd like to do with my presentation, I think we're all aware, specifically within Dubai and Abu Dhabi to a certain extent, of the growth of the population within these areas, and certainly across the GCC. It really has seen a quite remarkable amount of growth in the last 15 to 20 years. Now, growth is fantastic. Obviously, it's one of the major targets of the governments of the region, but it does come with challenges, and one of the most pervasive of which being noise pollution. When you have a greater number of people living within a shorter distance of each other, closer proximity, invariably you're going to get issues to do with noise and comfort. So in terms of the urban growth and context, you can see on the graph on the screen that these are the urbanization rates within cities like Dubai, Riyadh, and some of the major areas across the GCC. And really, since 1980, 1985, it really has been growing really quite significantly. So what is noise pollution? What is it that an acoustic engineer looks at? Well, we generally look at the source of noise pollution, and we can look at the way that it affects people, how it disrupts normal life, potentially causing physical, psychological health issues on the negative side. But on the positive side, it's people like to enjoy a nice, peaceful, tranquil space. They like to attend a concert or a musical event where the acoustics are nice and clear, and essentially spaces which are conducive to communication and enjoyment. And that means the exclusion of noise and sounds which can cause harm and discomfort, and really the encouragement of quieter, more havens of peace and tranquility, so that we can enjoy those spaces a bit more. Obvious sources of noise pollution that everybody is used to as construction machinery, traffic from vehicles, all sorts of different materials, material transportation. All these things have an effect on our hearing. It can disturb our sleep. It can increase our stress levels, especially over medium to long-term periods of time. And overall, a decreased quality of life for nearby residents of these sources of noise. So the impact of noise pollution on GCC urban landscapes, we typically see chronic noise exposure over significantly periods of months and years. This is linked directly to cardiovascular diseases, sleep disruption and hearing loss, stress and anxiety, especially in densely populated urban areas. The quality of life is decreased. You get increased numbers of complaints, and any developer, any operator of a hotel, any housing development organization will tell you that normally more than 3, possibly 4 of the top 5 complaints of any building, of any area, anywhere in the world is going to be noise related. There are legal and social ramifications as well. There's a strain on community relations, and especially when construction noise is persistent and seen to not being dealt with. There's potential legal implications as well, where the quality of life of people has been significantly negatively impacted, where, for example, there may be a major road development that goes through a once peaceful and tranquil neighborhood, significantly diminishing the value of property. We've seen many legal actions taken against developers and government agencies where that has happened, especially if it can be proven. So physical manifestations of noise stress, we've seen, and there is very well published data on delayed cognitive development of children, basically their ability to sleep and rest at night, and the effect that this has on their learning and their development. Psychological triggers for people with post-traumatic stress disorder, lower threshold for noise resulting in easier sleep disturbance. So people essentially become more sensitive to noise the more that they are exposed to it. Increased heart rate, changes in the immune system, and many other health related issues. So the role of the construction industry really in protecting the residents and effectively users of the environment for the noises, that the construction industry is a major contributor to those noise factors. They create the roads which the traffic uses, and during the construction process itself are obviously more contributing a lot greater levels to those issues. Heavy machinery construction schedules and uncontrolled construction site activities are the main culprits for this. Now, there are challenges within the industry. We understand that. Obviously, contractors and developers and governments don't set out to make huge amounts of noise. It's an unfortunate byproduct of the process of development. Developers are under competing project timelines. They're being squeezed and pushed to develop and construct things as quickly as they possibly can. There's a limited amount of regulation and enforcement for noise levels in certain areas, or that enforcement is largely subjective. For example, it may very well be that rather than a specific noise level given at certain times of the day. It's quite often that across the GCC that it's given up to the individual discretion of the police officer that might have been called to investigate a particular noise disturbance as to whether they personally think it's reasonable or not, and then they can apply their judgment. But which is all very well and good if the police officer has been trained specifically to analyze and assess certain types of noise in different kinds of environment and is able to apply that consistently. But of course, as soon as humans are involved and we take away specific values and assessment criteria, then as soon as something becomes subjective, then you do get an element of inconsistency creeping in. There's also a lack of awareness of enforcement, not only from the community, but from various government entities and the enforcement agencies themselves, if they actually exist. So the regulations and standards that exist currently within Dubai, Abu Dhabi, UAE, and the GCC, the regulations are not always enforced consistently, and they are often not stringent enough. We're lucky that in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, they are reasonably well presented, but in most other GCC countries, they're not. Some cities have noise limits in residential areas, but construction often falls outside of those actual physical boundaries. So even if the regulations do exist, because of the geographical location, they are not they're not actually legally enforceable. So there are gaps in the legislation. There is a need for more specific regulations that target construction noise specifically, but it would be nice if the regulations targeted all sources of noise and gave clear guidance to the consultants and authority bodies in terms of how they are supposed to enforce those and protect the public and the members of the environment from those excessive noise levels. There is a lack of clear guidelines for operating hours specifically, types of machinery and noise sources, and noise reduction practices and techniques during construction. If we were to look at and compare the GCC to America, Europe, and parts of Asia Pacific, not only are there quite strict regulations and criteria for noise levels, but there's quite prospective and prescriptive practices and construction guides that developers and those who are creating the source of noise are required to follow by law, effectively a best practice guide. And there are incentives for developers and contractors to be following these guidelines to ensure that they're keeping within the regulations, which seems to be a much better way to do it than to simply hit people with fines that don't do it. It's much better with the carrot rather than the stick approach, and a lot of countries have come to that conclusion. Dubai municipality specifically has noise pollution regulations, but they are primarily targeted at industrial and traffic noise, not really specifically at construction noise. Qatar, Oman, and Saudi Arabia have environmental protection laws, and again, their focus is mainly on industrial, but not really construction noise. So the call for action that we would like to see across the GCC is a strengthening of those regulations and laws, and ensuring that enforcement is crucial in mitigating noise pollution and really educating people as to how it affects their daily lives. So noise mitigation strategies you'll be not surprised to hear at all, an acoustic consultant will want to be involved as early as possible in the design of a project, just like everybody does. But the earlier that we are engaged in a project, the more that we can influence the direction of not only the design, but the construction, the implementation, and the development of a project from an early stage. It will get to a point in a project where there's very, very little that we can do because unfortunately the major decisions have been made and we're not able to influence or help to guide the project. And really, once we get beyond the scheme or detailed design stage of a project, most of the big decisions have been made. Although it still doesn't surprise me and probably a number of people on this call. Very often we are engaged to do a design review of a project, and they say that they're pretty much about a week or 2 weeks away from being issued for construction in terms of the design stage. And I do often say, well, if we do find things wrong with the project, how much can we actually change the design? And the answer is very often, well, you can't. So it's a bit of a mystery as to why we're brought in at that stage of the project. But at the end of the day, I guess at least giving a heads up on and a lessons learnt before they start the next project is better than nothing. So incorporating noise reducing designs and elements into the construction is critical and needs to happen at a very early stage. Early planning for construction timeline and equipment is absolutely critical. So although it may be a little bit late for us to get involved in the design of a project, at least if we're brought on board prior to construction, we can at least help the contractor with their environmental management plan, their noise management plan through the construction phase to try and minimize impact to surrounding residents at the very least. We can do that by ensuring that the contractor is using as quiet as machinery as they possibly can, modern machinery that's well maintained rather than the older less maintained equipment, which is obviously a fairly obvious step that you can take. But the inclusion of sound barriers around the development site, and simply it's just an awareness of where the noise sensitive receivers are on any given project, which is it may seem very, very obvious to a few people, but it's amazing how many times we are involved in a project and it's not quite so obvious to those on the ground how close they are actually to the noise sensitive receivers. Noise monitoring systems is a fantastic way to obviously ensure that noise being made by a development or any noise source for that matter, be it an airport or a major highway, how those noise levels vary depending on the time of the day or the evening, and also helps to quantify any mitigation that is put into place and help the contractor or the developer or the local authority to assess how effective a particular piece of mitigation that may have been introduced to the project, how effective it actually is, because that it helps them with future direction and investment in noise control strategies. Limiting working hours is a very simple, cost-effective way to do it. I mean, I say cost-effective, it doesn't cost anything to adjust the working hours of a site, but of course you will get pushback from any contractor or developer to saying, well, limiting their working hours is simply going to increase the cost of the development. But there are practical and sensible ways that you can do this. When we talk about limiting working hours, we're not necessarily talking about limiting the entire construction site. What we're talking about is limiting the working hours of the particularly noisy pieces of equipment. So one very effective way that we've managed to assist projects in Europe and Australia in particular is identifying the noisiest activities within a construction period and ensuring that the contractor is engaging those noisy activities during the waking hours. And if they have to do work very early in the morning or late in the afternoon or early evening or at night even, is that those noisy activities are simply not permitted during those times. But it doesn't mean the contractor can't work. They've just got to do their quieter work and just be a little bit more intelligent as to the scheduling and the timing of when they're doing their noisy activities. So, for example, one of the noisy activities you can get on a site is the delivery of materials and normally the production or laying of concrete from the trucks, and certainly they're reversing klaxons. So you either limit those concrete trucks from doing their deliveries and the heavy duty materials being delivered to during the day, or you can, for example, disable the reversing klaxons on the concrete trucks, which are incredibly loud. But what you then need to do is simply provide additional manpower, banksmen who can ensure that the movement of that truck around the site is safe, considering the fact that they don't have audible klaxons. But that's a sensible, practical, intelligent way that you can mitigate crazy amounts of the noise from the reversing klaxons from concrete trucks, but still keep within the noise limits of a given site to minimize disruption to the local community. And there's really 1,000 other examples of practical measures that can be implemented for that. One of the most effective ways, funnily enough, nobody will ever profess to being able to advise a contractor or a development how they can be absolutely silent. But what we found is one of the most frustrating things to residents and people that are affected by noise is the lack of engagement with the developer and the contractor. A lot of residents feel like contractors and developers simply feel like they've got a carte blanche, and they've got no rules, no regulations, and they don't have to comply, and they don't owe the local residents any kind of information or outlet to be able to provide or direct their complaints to. Funnily enough, we worked on projects where there have been absolutely no noise mitigation measures put in place. However, the contractor and the developer have been really effective at engaging with the local community, keeping them updated on regular information as to how long the works are going to take, when the noisiest works are going to be in place, and providing them with and one particular project where they actually had a mobile drop-in center, and it was basically two shipping containers that were placed next to each other on site, and they were fitted out inside to be effectively like a nice, comfortable living room with comfortable furniture and an area where people could come in and have a cup of tea, have a cup of coffee, speak to a representative of the company, and then just simply vent their frustrations or their complaints, or find out a bit more information about that development, how long the contractor was going to be there, which roads were going to be closed off at which particular days or weeks throughout the development. And they found that the number of complaints of that development dropped by nearly 75%, not because of any noise mitigation measures being put in place, but simply because the contractor engaged and provided really good information and really good engagement with the local communities to exactly what they were doing. So rather than those complaints going to the police and going to the local authority, the residents directed their complaints or their concerns directly to a representative of the contractor in that safe, comfortable space, and they felt like they were being listened to, and they felt like they were being engaged with, and the number of complaints dropped massively. So I think there's a really big lesson. I think a lot of contractors and a lot of members of the construction community and development community, and certainly local authority, can learn from that specifically. So in terms of the future director and innovations, smart cities and noise control, the Internet of Things, we're finding now that as technology develops and technology is becoming more and more available, sensors for real-time analyzing, real-time monitoring, providing developers and contractors with real-time information that is accurate and usable will allow them to gauge their impact on the community and then gauge their impact of their developments on our residents and on communities. And that idea of collaboration between the governments, the construction firms, the urban planners, and the users of the space is really a critical issue, I think, within this event. I mean, it's something that really doesn't happen very much currently across the GCC, but is fairly well recognized within Europe and America and Australia, for example. And I think that's a big lesson that can be learned moving into the next phase of Dubai and Abu Dhabi's and the UAE and the GCC's development, for certain. So if we just jump back to what the regulation requirements are currently across the GCC. So within the UAE, we've got the most developed regulations. What they essentially do is they cite UK regulations as they are. So we've got British standards, BS 8233, which is kind of like a general catch-all for all kinds of developments, all kinds of buildings. Within healthcare, we've got HTM 0801. We've got the Building Bulletin 93, which is education specific. We've got approved document E, which is focusing on residential. And then we've got the various sustainable design guides which supplement those. Sometimes in some specific topics they go further. They're more advanced, more detailed, and more strict than the UK regulations. In other instances, they're more relaxed. So what we typically tend to do when we're involved in a project is make the developer or the building owner aware of the differences between these regulations, and then identify where there's conflicts. And invariably, we end up advising on using the most stringent one from each of those situations. And then we arrive at a set of standards that are specific to that particular development. Saudi Arabia has the Saudi Building Code. It leads on LEED. We're obviously ASHRAE in terms of mechanical services design. Most of the standards really across the world, if they don't actually cite ASHRAE standards for HVAC noise and vibration, then you'll find that the requirements in those documents are very close to the requirements for ASHRAE. So what we typically see is that if a project is going to comply with ASHRAE requirements for the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, then we generally find that they're in general accordance with most of the international standards and criteria. So that makes our job a lot easier when we see that a project is got an MEP consultant that is going to be adopting ASHRAE, which is it's fairly typical, not only in Dubai and the GCC, but really across anywhere, any region in the world. So normally HVAC, as long as it's following ASHRAE, we're okay. That leaves us to focus on the facade, so that's the noise coming in from outside of the building, the interior design, which is the behavior of the sound once it gets into the space, and then other things like structure-borne noise and vibration, which could be caused by roads or railways, which might be nearby, and the actual massing, the walls and floors that are within a building, which is obviously part of the structural engineer and the architect's responsibility. Really across Iraq, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, and the other GCC countries, we then see some kind of version of the International Building Code, which is very, very sparse. There really isn't much to do with acoustics in there. It's generally about 1 or 2 paragraphs long, and it's incredibly limited, which basically pushes the responsibility of achieving any kind of acoustic comfort basically back onto the developer and makes it more of a commercial decision. So if a developer wants to consider their project a 5-star or a 7-star development, then they should look to get independent advice to ensure that it complies with that, and it's commensurate with the level of development that they are commercially trying to provide to their the end users, or the people who are going to rent or purchase the spaces. A very typical environmental protection agency noise emission limit might be something that you see on the screen right now. It's fairly typical. You'll see it replicated in lots of documents across the GCC. But there's a common mistake that is made. A lot of consultants, a lot of developments within the GCC will look at this table, of which there's various iterations, and assume that these are the noise levels that are recommended for a development in terms of the noise level in the general space. That's actually a common misconception. These tables, and this one specifically, it relates to the allowable amount of noise that a building can contribute to the environment. So it is not an indication of the noise level that affects a building. For example, a lot of facade consultants may take these noise levels and assume that these are the noise levels that the Ministry of the Environment or the local authority have said are in existence in around a building, and therefore they will design the building to cope with these noise levels. That's not the case at all. These noise levels represent the limit that HVAC predominantly, but the noise levels that a building is restricted to contributing to the environment at the building line. Now, if you were to assume that these noise levels are the noise levels that each of these areas of a city are actually achieving, then you'll be underestimating the noise levels that are actually affecting a building by nearly 10 to 15 dB. These noise levels were generated deliberately below the known existing background noise level. So the authorities can avoid what is called a noise creep. If you were to have 10 developments and they all contributed 50 dB to a noise environment, then you would find that the resulting noise level after you added 10 developments of 50 dB, that they actually all, you would find that the resulting noise level would be between 55 and 57 dB. So therefore, the limits that is required in terms of these tables is significantly below the existing noise level of a given site. So it's a misunderstanding to think that these noise levels are the noise levels within a given site. And if you're going to design your building to 50 dB, for example, if it's a residential area which includes some workshops and commercial businesses, and you were to select your glass on the basis that you're assuming the external noise level is 50 or 55 dB, but in actual fact, the real noise levels are more like 60 to 65 dB, that means you're going to fail to meet your internal noise levels in that building by more than 10 dB. And that is a common problem across not only Dubai and Abu Dhabi and the rest of the GCC. It's unfortunately a common misunderstanding of what this particular table represents. So if we look at international criteria versus local criteria, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, and Jordan, it is a mix of European, which is ISO, and ASTM. You have places like Abu Dhabi, which actually have a bit of a mix of both. They kind of pick and choose. Dubai's based mainly on ISO because of the UK standards, as I mentioned. And then Kingdoms of Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, because of their very close relationship with the American administration, have adopted typically American standards. So we don't have a unifying GCC-wide criteria, so it's a little bit difficult to compare country to country. However, I understand that Saudi Arabia is currently in the process of early drafting of a unified GCC wide building. I mean, code is probably the wrong word. It's more like a guide. It's a standard which I think the KSA is going to suggest to unify everybody together, but it's not going to be mandatory. It's simply going to be an attempt to bring all of the various different rules and regulations together under one document. Approval pathways currently. So local municipality and authority, we're typically focused on media-driven and hungry disciplines, as I mentioned. So facades, fire, life safety, structural, the disciplines that tend to get the headlines if something goes wrong. These are the ones that the local authority are focused on. Developer and operators have their own standards, which is great, and which is the main reason as to why we've got to where we've got to at the moment with acoustic regulations and standards. They have really been driven by developers and operators on their own. For example, hotel operators will have their own design standards, irrespective of what the local authority requires to be adhered to. And very often, and because a lot of the local authorities in Dubai municipality also, they don't have a dedicated noise or acoustics team. So if there's a discrepancy, if there's a complaint, if there's a failure to, or a suspected failure to meet regulatory standards, what happens is the noise-related issues are essentially deferred to the project consultant. And what Dubai municipality will say is that they will effectively defer their decision to the project consultant, which to a certain extent, it alleviates the issue of the local authority having the need for the expertise in-house. The trouble is, when you have a project consultant who is working on behalf of the developer or on behalf of the design team, it's easy to understand that they may be put under pressure to come to a certain conclusion with regards to a noise-related issue, and it's easy for the authority to wash their hands of the situation in that respect. But it would be nice. I think it would be certainly a much better approach that if we did have a dedicated noise team within the authority set up, and even if they were to follow a very good example of how the fire and life safety side of things developed initially, which was they had a handful of consultants, experienced, qualified consultants. They were considered houses of expertise. So whilst Dubai Civil Defence kind of got itself up to speed, up to standard when it was developing its regulations and enforcement, they deferred a lot of the assessment and the regulatory again, assessment and conformity assessment to these 5 houses of expertise as Dubai Civil Defence kind of got themselves and their numbers up to speed, so that there wasn't that bottleneck of and conflict of interest when it came to noise related, fire related issues, and it seemed to work quite well. So the other part I want to talk about today is the acoustic benefits of achieving good acoustic performances on site. It's probably a little known fact that achieving a good acoustic performance means that there are several other positive benefits which are not always known about and not always realized. So the principle of good acoustic design and the control of noise between one space and another is based on the premise that you need a good amount of mass, and that mass needs to be built with a good standard of air tightness. So if you have a good massive structure and it does not have significant weaknesses in terms of air paths and gaps, then you will get a good, very good acoustic performance. Now, I'm sure there's many people on this call that will probably resonate with what I've just said in terms of what makes a good construction within their own disciplines. So by having a good amount of mass and a good amount of air tightness, you will inherently get very good thermal performance from a building. Very good thermal efficiency in terms of insulation of temperature, maintaining cooled spaces, and the air tightness ensures that thermal efficiency doesn't leak out over time. So the fact that you can have a good acoustic performance and that acoustic assessment that we undertake by creating a lot of noise on one side of construction and measuring how much comes through on the other side, as you will see from the graph on the table, that we measure with specific frequencies. And we can tell from a construction whether it's been built properly, and from an acoustic graph we can tell how much mass is in the system and whether there are any air tightness or gaps within the system. So as you will see, it's a rough rule of thumb. It's not hard and fast, but when we see results of an acoustic test on site, we can very quickly make some basic assumptions as to what has happened. Typically, the mass within a system is very much affecting or directing, influencing the low frequency end of a performance table. If we see problems with cavity resonance, i.e. you might have a cavity construction and there's no absorbing material within the cavity, or there is some kind of structure-borne vibration, the vibration that gets into a structure and travels around a partition from one room to another, we typically see that as an excessive value within the medium frequency range, as you can see on the table. And if there's physical air gaps where you might be able to pass small objects through, or even the pieces of paper or a pen, or even gaps that you can't really see, but if the air can get through, then the high frequency noise will leak through. So when I am looking at one of my team that's gone to site to do a sound insulation test, a commission test on a site, and I'm looking at the result, I will be able to see generally, has that performed well? If it hasn't performed well, is that because the design is defective? They haven't used enough mass in the design, in which case I will see a failure at the low end of the spectrum. If there is something to do with the isolation or the decoupling of the construction, I'll see that as a problem generally in the middle frequencies. And if the contractor, for example, hasn't been paying attention and he's left gaps, or he hasn't sealed up the partition or the wall or the floor, the glazing system very well, then we'll see problems in the high end of the construction. But the beauty about this is that this test can take into account lots of different elements at the same time. And generally, when you put a lot of these test results next to each other, you very quickly begin to build up a picture of how much care and attention the contractor has been paying, if there is a problem with the original design, and we can generally narrow down where that issue might be. As I say, if we get a good performance with a good amount of mass and a decent attention to detail and good air tightness in a project, generally you will find that the thermal efficiency and the fire and life safety compartmentalization of a project is generally also of high quality, because you simply will not get good performances in those other disciplines unless the acoustic performance is also doing well. So I just want to give you a couple of case studies and explain to you how it is that we've gone about implementing our advice within a couple of projects that we were involved with previously. This particular project, the Expo Operations Center, I'm sure many of you were involved with the Expo development. So there are some interesting discussions on this one regarding the implementation of regulations specifically for this building. The contractor made the point, or believed, that because the operations and control centers with regards to Expo were temporary buildings, they were really only being designed and constructed for the period that Expo was going to be operating. Their argument was that the buildings did not need to necessarily comply with the regulations within the Dubai Building Code. We argued the opposite. The reason that a lot of the team were being brought on board with the Expo development was because the buildings were going to have a legacy use, and they were supposed to be designed to be repurposed rather, for between 5 to 7 years after Expo finished. So they could not be considered temporary buildings in the respect that they're only being used for 6 or 9 months. They were being designed specifically used for between 5 to 7 years at the least, and very often and possibly beyond that if further use could be used for that. So that is an interesting case study in terms of the legality of the implementation of regulations within that specific space. The decision as to whether that was actually implemented between the 5 and 7 years was between Expo and the contractor at the time, but you can see how those kind of questions come up occasionally. Presidential Palace, Al Watan, very privileged to be a part of this project, right from the design through the construction period and through to implementation and commissioning of this. The far right-hand image that you'll see is the entrance atrium, outside of which is about 6 helicopter parking spaces, as you can imagine. But this was presented and designed to be the first presentation, the first stop of any overseas dignitary that would be visiting the ruler or any of the royal family for professional purposes. And the ruler specifically said that they wanted a space that was conducive to being able to give speeches, and if they had the military bands playing the national anthem of the visiting dignitary, then that should be able to be clear, it could be heard. The original design, as you can see, was marble floor, gold leaf and brass and marble and solid gypsum on the walls, and a decorative ceiling. Now, as you can imagine, a very, very echoey, very, very reverberant space. The design intent for that space was to try and implement as much acoustic material in that space as we possibly could, whilst maintaining the look and the feel of the space. And it took several companies to work together, but they actually managed to get a reverberation time in that space, which I was incredibly surprised as to how good it actually managed to be in the end. But it just shows what you can do when you put your mind towards working together and engaged at the relevant time of the project. Case study number 3, Quantum FinTech, which is I guess Bitcoin, or these the digital currency trader a very successful one based down in Abu Dhabi, which we're working on behalf of Foster and Partners. And it was the incorporation of a wide range of spaces. And really, although it was a commercial office, these spaces were in use day and night. And the use of, as you can see from the screen, having various uses, professional uses during the day, morphing into more of a I guess hospitality type space in the evening. But really, the brief was that the space is a 24-hour working space. Hello, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Does somebody have a question? No? Okay. Okay, so the case study number 3, I won't mention Balad Beast of the Music Festival. That was in Saudi Arabia. Cleveland Clinic will be the last case study that I bring up. This is an interesting project where we had more than 22 extremely large diesel generators in the basement of this building. And the design brief was that the hospital needs to be able to work 24 hours a day. And it is possible that the diesel generators might kick in if there is a brownout or a reduction of electrical capacity during the day for whatever reason. And so the hospital needed to work 100%, not just basic life safety systems, but the hospital needed to be 100% operational off of these 22 diesel generators for up to a month at a time if strictly necessary. So the design of the building needed to take into account the ventilation of those extremely large generators and ensure that the surrounding communities were not negatively adversely affected. And in this particular instance, the ventilation of those diesel generators faced directly towards the Hilton Hotel, which is directly across the creek that you can see there. So there were some interesting design procedures that went into place, but we did manage to attenuate the 24 diesel generators so that they could operate without affecting the nearby residential community. So that really kind of concludes my presentation. I've really just touched very briefly on urban growth and the importance for acoustics and some practical measures that can be used to implement it. But I mean, I would like to just conclude that really one of the critical issues or one of the critical things that needs to be borne in mind is that noise pollution is a critical issue for GCC cities, especially because of the urban growth. The construction industry and everybody involved in this call plays a critical role in mitigating noise pollution in their own way. I believe we need to strengthen the noise-related regulations enforcement. We need to encourage the adoption of noise-reducing technologies and encourage that collaboration. And that really is the key issue, the collaboration between stakeholders who are involved in all stages of the project for a more sustainable future. And really, a final thought for you all is that noise pollution is not just about reducing sound levels. It's about improving the quality of life for everybody. And that's for urban residents while enabling growth and development. And it's critical, I think, that we do that whilst enabling the growth and development rather than constricting it or putting up issues and making it difficult for people. So that concludes my presentation. I'm quite happy to take any questions or queries from anybody, if anybody has something.
Thank you, Paul. Members, you're welcome to, I hope you have access to your mic. Try. Yes, Dr. Iman, please go ahead. Can you try unmuting yourself? I see that you have access to that.
Sorry, I was pressing, it seems, the wrong thing. I was wondering, how can we make, because sound is a major thing, it's not just about like the negative of sound, but the positive of sound, or how you can block negative sounds and filter in positive sounds. And also, affects our health. It is critical. It is leading to heart attacks and stuff like that, and excessive fatigue and many health problems, but it's just not directly emphasized. How can we force legislations, like you said at the end, and rules to actually implement this awareness about what sound can make, not just noise?
Yes, now that's an excellent question. So the regulations in terms of what is actually legislated for developments and buildings to comply is perfectly well written. The UK regulations that are in place that the Dubai and Abu Dhabi and other areas have adopted are the good legislation. It's good criteria. The problem that we've got here, and the reason why it's not implemented, is because of the lack of enforcement. So this enforcement comes in America and Europe and Australia and other places like this because the local authority say to a developer, you will not get final approval or sign off of your project, and you cannot sell or lease any of the properties within this development until you have got a certificate of conformance from an accredited acoustic consultant, accredited acoustic engineer. And so well, it's not just acoustics, obviously, it's everything. So, for example, a developer will build a residential tower block in Europe, but they are not permitted to be allowed to sell or rent any of those units until they've got a certificate of compliance from the fire life safety engineer, from the structural engineer, from the thermal efficiency engineer, for example, from the sustainability engineer, and from the acoustic engineer. And the acoustic engineer analyzes what the contractor has done. He compares what he's actually physically built compared with what was in the design. And if the acoustic engineer says, yes, they have complied with the requirements and all of these details are in compliance with the requirements and the regulations, here you go, Mr. Developer, here is your conformity certificate. Now, that's what happens in Europe, but it doesn't happen in the GCC. It doesn't happen in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And therefore, because the developer is not required to provide evidence that he's complied with the criteria, invariably they see it as a cost saving. So they invariably don't do it. If they can save time and money and increase profitability on a project, then of course they're going to do it. So the incentive needs to come from the local authority to say you must have this certificate of conformance, and it must be shown to us before we will give you permission to sell or lease any of the properties within your development. I believe that if that were to be implemented, that will result in a very large increase in the number of developments and buildings that comply with the required code. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, but I've already tried this. It's not working. I don't know how
the implementation. Well, yeah, but the trouble is that this enforcement needs to come from Dubai municipality. So because it doesn't come from the municipality, if let's just say a residential building were to be completed next week, Dubai municipality does not demand that the contractor or the developer shows that he has complied with the acoustic regulations. It's not requested. So therefore, there is no pressure on the developer to comply with that regulation. He knows the regulation exists, but he doesn't have to demonstrate that he's complied with it because he's not required to show evidence that he's complied with it. So it doesn't happen currently in Dubai. It doesn't happen currently in Abu Dhabi, which is why a lot of the buildings don't comply with the code. It's mentioned at the start of the project that these requirements are required by law. It's mandatory, but the developer very often decides they're not going to implement it. They're not going to follow that advice, and there is no there's no fine, or there's no enforcement, there's no comeback on him negatively So because if he doesn't comply with it, so it doesn't happen currently because there's no enforcement to comply with it currently.
Thank you.
So essentially what I'm saying is if there was enforcement, if the municipality did demand that the developers show compliance with that requirement, then you will see them taking it seriously and they will comply. Because they're for example, civil defense requires that all buildings comply with civil defense code, NFPA, design requirements. And whilst not every building in the UAE complies with it, what you'll find is there's a lot more compliance with the NFPA requirements in buildings in the UAE than there are compliance with the acoustic regulations, because civil defense will inspect and they will give a non-conformance if they believe the building does not comply. And so contractors take NFPA and fire life safety very seriously in Dubai because there is enforcement of it. But there is no enforcement of the acoustic regulations currently, unless we can convince the Dubai municipality and Abu Dhabi authority and the other authorities to make it a mandatory compliant requirement.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Dr. Iman, for the question. Any further questions? I guess not. Anyways, we've reached, we have completed the technical workshop scheduled for today. Paul, do you have any final words? And just to let you all know, we're going to post, inshallah, this recording on our website, and as well as the presentation slides. Feel free to ask if you want to be connected to Paul to discuss this further. Thank you for your attendance.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Lana. Thank you for the opportunity to present. So I'll just reiterate what Lana said. If I don't know about everybody else, but I always think about the best questions to ask after the event has finished. Lana can make my contact details available. If anybody has got any questions or queries about regulations, about implementation, or needs any assistance with anything to do with acoustics, noise, or vibration, please feel to reach out to me or anyone in my team, and we'll be happy to help.
Thank you, Paul. And with that, we end the technical workshop for today. Looking forward to our next one. Thank you for your attendance and have a very good weekend, inshallah. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.